Shalom lekulam, Rosh Chodesh Sameach, Rosh Chodesh Av. Happy new month, the month of Av. And usually when I talk about the month of Av, I talk about how it's the month of tragedy. Um, so much has happened in the month of Av that has been grievous tragedy. Um, for example, in the Bible, the 10 spies returning with their discouraging report was purported to happen during the month of Av. Aaron the high priest died in the month of Av. The Bar Kokhba rebellion was crushed in the month of Av. Um, King Edward the First expelled the Jews from England, and King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella expelled the Jews from Spain in the month of Av. And last but certainly not least, both Jewish temples were breached and destroyed in the month of Av. So usually I talk about how Av is the month of tragedy, how it's also the month of comforting. Av is the Hebrew word for father, and this month is also often called Menachem Av, the comforting father, because when Israel is suffering tragedy, the father is there to comfort his people. Um, Today, I'm not going to do that. A friend of mine asked me about how the names of the month, Hebrew, English, um, have ties to, paganism. Now, in the Hebrew calendar, the one that pops into the forefront of our mind is Tammuz. But besides that one, I was wondering myself what kind of pagan ties there are to the names of the months. Now, you might already know that um, pre Babylonian exile, and especially in the days of Moses, the months were to be numbered. Now, there are 4 months in the Bible that have names before the Babylonian exile, but otherwise the months are numbered in the Bible. Um, But the names of the months that are assigned in the Hebrew Bible seem to be related to agriculture. After all, it was an agrarian society. Um, and it also reminds me of an interesting archaeological find. In 1908, McAllister found what's called the Geyser tablet. And based on the inscription written on it in Hebrew, in Old Hebrew or Paleo Hebrew letters, it appears to date to maybe about middle 10th century BC. So we're talking around the reign of Solomon. The Gezer tablet is kind of a um, I don't know if I want to call it a calendar, but it talks about the months of the year. Maybe it's in such a way that makes it easy to remember. Maybe it was for memorization purposes. No one knows quite what the purpose of it was, but the tablet is very interesting. It says 2 months are for gathering, 2 months are for planting, 2 months are for late sowing, 1 month for cutting flax, 1 month for reaping barley, 1 month for reaping and measuring grain, 2 months for pruning, 1 month for summer fruit. And the name of the scribe, at least partially, is at the bottom of the tablet, probably Aviyah. But we can see from this Gezer tablet that the months, at least according to this, didn't really have any um, ties to paganism, but rather to agriculture. In this month you do this, and that month you do that. And when we compare the names of the months to other ancient Near Eastern cultures, more or less we see the same story emerging. Um, According to the Bible, the first month is Nissan. Scratch that. According to the Bible, the first month is Aviv, but later on it came to be known as Nissan. Now, Aviv is the Hebrew word that means the ripening bud or the ripening ear of barley. Um, but when Israel adopted the name Nisan from the Babylonian name for this month, it eventually assigned like a homiletic meaning to this name, uh, whereas in Babylonian, which came from Akkadian, the meaning of this month is like first month or first fruits month or something like that. It's the first harvest, especially of barley or early crops. However, homiletically, Nisan came to mean their flight, meaning their flight out of Egypt. Why? Because Nisan is the month of redemption and miracles, and that's nice and well, and it preaches well, um, but it's not etymologically correct. Um, the name of this month came from an Akkadian word that meant first of the month or the first produce of the season or something like that. The second month is called Iyar. The Bible calls it Ziv. Now, the word Ziv is splendor or radiance, whether it's because the sun is shining brightly or maybe the splendor and radiance of flowers blooming. Um, the word in the word in Assyrian means something like either rosette or ornamental. Uh, it might even have connections to plants. Um, so it kind of gives that idea of everything is flourishing, everything is wonderful, everything is beautiful. The Babylonian name for it, which again is from Akkadian, is the month of the bull, maybe because of the constellation that's coming up at that time. Or it could possibly mean something related to prosper. That's what ER comes from the Akkadian Aru or Ayaru. The third month is Sivan. Um, Sivan also has a homiletic meaning, meaning their covering. Well, the third month, the month of Sivan, is when the Torah is given to Israel. So that is their covering. But if you look at the Babylonian name, which again came from Akkadian, um, it has something more to do with brick making. Evidently, the Babylonians made bricks in this time of month. Um, Assyrian also has a slightly different name for it. It's the month of the summer furrow. Um, but we're familiar with the verb lissamen. So the Canaanite meaning might have something to do with a point or mark or something like that. But it's interesting how Sivan, which comes from Simanu, becomes it takes on this meaning of their covering because it's the giving of the Torah, which is very creative. It just doesn't fit etymologically to the Babylonian name of this month. Then the fourth month, Tammuz. This is the most obvious pagan connection because Tammuz is the name of a pagan deity. Um, the pagan god Tammuz seems to be like the god of the spring, or the god of the agriculture, god of the flocks. So he's personified in the creative powers of spring. Um, Incidentally, this is the month of the sin of the golden calf. What a befitting month to put it in, right? And then we're to this month. Today the month of Av is going to begin. Now, there's nothing wrong with Av, right? Av means father, or Menachem Av, the comforting father. Yeah, in Hebrew, Av means father, and even in other Semitic languages, Abu means father. But apparently, from the Babylonian name of this month, it comes from torches or fiery or something like that. This is the month that these open fires, these braziers, are set aflame, and the torches lifted for the the Anunnaki, and the fire god comes down from the sky and vies with Shamash. Shamash, this is the word where modern Hebrew gets Shemesh, the sun, comes down and fights with Shamash. And this is the month in which the fire god dries out the land. Wow. So it's not Av as in father, apparently, from the Babylonian name. It has to do with scorching heat, where these mythological gods are fighting and drying out the earth. That makes sense. I mean, this is a pretty hot time of month. Maybe next month it'll start cooling off, or the month after. Then we get into Elul. Now, Elul sounds a little bit like a Hebrew word meaning something vain. Um, Homiletically, it's like the month of repentance. Well, the reason it's the month of repentance is because next month, the seventh month, is going to be the month with Yom Kippur. So of course it's the month of repenting. Um, but the Babylonian name for this, which again comes from the Akkadian, is the month of harvest. This is a harvest month. So again, these names have to do with agriculture. Then the seventh month, Tisheray or Tishri. Um, the Babylonian name for this is beginnings. Now, it's because the Babylonians split the year up a little bit differently than we do today. It had uh, sections of the year, and this was the beginning of the second half of the year. Well, in modern Israel, the seventh month, Tishrei, is actually the first civil month. And it's because the Babylonians called this the beginning of, even though it was the second half of the year, it's the beginning of that part of the year. And so Israel now today calls the seventh month, the biblical seventh month, the first month. Um, Then we move on to the eighth month. Now, I did a Rosh Chodesh on the eighth month, the month of Cheshvan, before, and apparently there's some linguistic connection between Shmone and Shavan or Shamna. So the month of Cheshvan could just literally be Yareya Cheshvan, or the eighth one. It could just mean the eighth month. But it's also possible that there's another linguistic connection, the month of laying foundations, or the month of opening up the dams for the irrigation of fields. This is one of those months that had an original Hebrew name in the Bible, pre-exilic. It was the month of Bul. Bul in the sense of rain. Um, Also, this is traditionally the month in which the flood of Noah began. Um, I just noticed in in my notes that Tisheray, going back to the seventh month, Tisheray, in which you have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, that also had a a pre-exilic name in the Bible. Remember, I said there were four of them. It was called Etanim. In Hebrew, Etan means reliable, and the Etanim were the streams that didn't dry up. You know, the whole land is getting dry. All the little wadis are drying out. And at this point, only the um, most reliable streams or the ever flowing streams are still going. That's the reason that the seventh month in the Bible is called Etanim. We talked about the eighth month, Cheshvan. The ninth is Kislev. Kislev. Um, Nobody really knows where Kislev comes from. Um, could be related to, like copious fertility, or from a Babylonian verb that means to be thick or congealed, or possibly the verb kasal, which also shows up in Ugaritic, and it has to do with being boneless or unsupported by a skeletal structure. The point being that this is a month where there's no agricultural happenings. It's like the whole system just melts, the whole system stops. The whole agricultural system is on pause during this month. Um, in the next month, the month of Tevet, some people will say, "Oh, Tevet, this is from the root good, Tov. This is the month of good or divine grace." Um, Probably not. It probably has something, according to the Babylonian name for this, it's forthcoming of water or violent rains. And it's probably related to the Hebrew root tava, which has to do with sinking in. There's so much water that everything just turns to mud. These are the most violent rains. These are the first rains, and it just turns everything to absolutely useless mud. Um, Then you get to the 11th month, Shvat. This doesn't have anything to do with Sabbath or Shabbat. As I mentioned in I think my previous new moon teaching. No, this has to do with Shevet. Shevet is a rod, which was oftentimes used for beating, and the root is related to that verb. So it's talking about beating or destructive rain. So the rain is starting in Tevet, it's continuing through Shvat. Then you get to the 12th month, Adar. Now, the name of Adar is from the Babylonian name that has to do with threshing or grain cutting. Um, there's also possibly a Canaanite meaning that's like to be dark. Why? Because the days are very short during this part of the year. Um, so anyway, as you can see, as far as the Semitic and the Babylonian names of the month, there isn't too much. There's some, but there isn't too much connection to paganism. Although I'm sure plenty of mythological or pagan stories happen uh, during any of these months. But then we step over to the Gregorian calendar, which was originally the Julian calendar, which before that was another calendar, the Roman calendar, I guess. Initially, the Roman calendar didn't even give names to what we now call January and February. It started in March, went through to December, and then you have like this nebulous 2 months where there's not a whole lot of government happenings. So they didn't even bother giving those months names. Eventually, later on, when Julius came along, he gave them names, and that's kind of where we get them today. Later on, Caesar Augustus came and modified it a little bit and gave us what we now currently have as the Roman calendar. January, the month of January was given its name probably because of the god Janus. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's like this two-faced god, one facing forward and one facing back. The god of gates and doorways, and some people will say the god of new beginnings or perspective or something like that. That has a pagan connection. What about February? Well, Februar was a Roman ritual purification festival. Um, but maybe the month is related to, an old Italian god named Februus. Um, this month was, before it was called February, was actually called Solmonat, which is like literally the month of mud. There was also another less used term for this month called Kalmonat. It's where we get our word kale from, and which means cabbage month. You can just imagine that if all the food is used up throughout the winter, what do you have left to eat in February? Probably a lot of cabbage. Um, then you get to March. Now, like I said, originally this was the first month of the Roman calendar. It has nothing to do with marching. That's a completely unrelated French word or French root from which the word march comes. This is related to Martius or Mars, the Roman god of war. The month of March originally um, paid homage to the Roman god of war, Mars. April, some people say, maybe April is related to the Latin word that means to open, the opening of flowers or whatnot. While others say, no, April is probably the uh, Latin version of Afro, as in Aphrodite. And so therefore it's, venerating this goddess. Um, then on to the month of May. Again, there is a goddess named Maias or Maesta, uh, like the great one, the italic goddess of honor and reverence, the daughter of Faunus and wife of Vulcan. So maybe the month of May is named after her. Well, that's pagan. There is a dissenting opinion. It says, well, maybe it just comes from the word maioris, which is, where we get our word major, and it has to do with older men, kind of like, that we have a Father's Day or a Black History Month. Well, this would have been the month dedicated to older men. It's an interesting suggestion. In contrast, in contrast to that, you have the month of June. Now, again, there's a pagan explanation for where June comes from, but as opposed to the month of Maioris, the older men, some people will say, and then June would be Junioris, which is like the young men. So you have May dedicated to old men and June dedicated to young men. Maybe. Seems more likely, though, that June is dedicated to Junius or Juno, a goddess who is the principal goddess of the Roman pantheon. She's the goddess of marriage and the well being of women, the queen of gods, and goddess of marriage, childbirth, and fertility, the protector of Rome. She's the wife and sister of Jupiter. Um, I guess the Greek equivalent for her would be Hera. Um, so maybe June is has some pagan ties. Now, July, the seventh month, well, the seventh month in our calendar, but in the Roman calendar, originally the fifth month, counting from March, was formerly called Quintilis. You can hear the quin in there, meaning five. But when Emperor Julius came along, Julius Caesar came along, he reformed the Roman calendar, named that month after himself, sometime around 46 BC. It came to be known as July from Julius, his name. The next month, August, used to be the sixth month in the Roman calendar. It was called Sextilis. Again, that prefix meaning six. But Augustus renamed it after himself. He named it after himself. So that's why today our eighth month is called August. The rest of the months are actually numbered, surprisingly, maybe. September has that septa, like septennial, septa meaning seven. So September is the seventh month. October is the eighth, like octopus, an eight-legged animal, an eight-footed animal. November, there aren't terribly many words that have novum at the beginning, but novem is the number that is the root that means nine. So November was the ninth month. And then December, we should all recognize, like deci or decimal or something like that, has to do with 10. So September 7, October 8, November 9, December 10, those were the last months of the original Roman year. And there was no name for January and February, but later on they were included. Um, and it was also during the time of Augustus, I believe, who when the beginning of the year moved from March to January. So as we can see, there appears to be some pagan roots in the names of the months of the year. But then there are the days of the week. In Hebrew, these are numbered, even today. The first day is Yom Rishon, the first day. The second day is Yom Sheni, the second day, and so on. The only day that has a number, the only day that doesn't have a number is Shabbat, the day of rest, Saturday. But the Roman names for these were definitely pagan. You have the day of the sun, honoring the sun god, which is still today called Sunday. The second day of the week, Monday, you may not hear it as well, is dedicated to honor the moon god. It's Moon Day, Monday. Now, the Romans, on the third day of the week, honored the god Mars. But when our current name of the day of this day of the week, uh, it, the current name of the day of the week, Tuesday, came from the Saxons, naming it after their god Tiu, which was their version of the god of war. So it's called Tuesday. This is the day of Tiu, their god of war. That's pagan. Wednesday, to the Romans, was the day of Mercury, which is equivalent to Hermes. But Wednesday is named in honor of the Teutonic god Woden or Odin. So Woden's Day is where we get Wednesday. This is the messenger god of commerce, travel, thievery, eloquence, and science. Thursday, you might be able to hear the Thor in it. That's the Teutonic god Thor, which is more or less equivalent to the Jupiter that the Romans venerated on this day, although Jupiter or Zeus came to have more responsibility than the Teutonic god Thor did, but in some ways they're similar. So we have Thursday honoring Thor. Now, Friday is particularly heinous. This is the Romans venerated the planet or the goddess Venus on Friday, and the later name came from the Teutonic goddess either Frigg or Freya. As the mythology goes, Freya slept with every single god and elf in Asgard at some point or another, including her own brother. And that is after whom Friday is named. And last but not least, we have Saturn venerated on Saturday. This is the Roman god of agriculture. Are these the kinds of words that should be on our lips? Honoring these um, Roman or Teutonic or Norse gods or whoever it is, should we be honoring gods that are not the God of Israel by naming these days after them? Or should we be more like the Hebrews and be more like the Bible and name them by numbers? First day, second day. Something to think about. I don't know that this is something that's just going to happen all of a sudden spontaneously, but I guess the more people that are aware of the names of months and the names of the days of the week coming from or having pagan origins is the first step to purifying our speech and making sure that we are um, speaking words worthy of the people of God. In this month of Av, I wish you much comfort, and may there be no tragedy, but if there is, then I wish much comfort, and I wish everybody Rosh Chodesh Av Sameach Lehitraot.